Thank you for inviting me to speak at this summit today. In this segment, you'll be learning about the Freedom Haven Project, which seeks to create a sovereign state with the highest level of personal, social, and economic freedoms available anywhere else in the world. On Freedom Haven, the only laws enacted will be those that forbid murder, kidnapping, and theft, with provisional laws that allow for the use of force to defend one's own life, liberty, and property. Today, you will learn about how territorial sovereign claims like this can legally be made within the framework of existing global laws, such as the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and Montevideo Convention. I will explain the concepts that form the foundation for the minimalist government we are designing, and also share our current plans for how the physical structure of Freedom Haven might look. When someone is wounded, it is important to identify what caused the damage in the first place. If it is still present, like a splinter in an infected fingertip, you must remove it before the body can heal itself. Imagine crashing your bike on a given path strewn with broken glass and scraping your elbows and your knees. What would the doctor do for these wounds? Wouldn't they try to remove the broken glass, gravel, and germs from the wound and tell you to keep the wound clean and your body healthy so that it is unobstructed in the healing process? Imagine being told that the most effective way to heal the wound would be to vigorously rub more broken glass and gravel into it. Obviously, this would be a bad idea, but can you imagine actually believing that would really help? What if this is precisely how we've been trained to believe that we can heal the problems with our societies and to heal the world? What if we have been taught to see the gravel and broken glass in our society mores not as a destructive element, but that they are instead the healing balm, and that we should continue to applying them to our wound? We wonder then, as we aggressively cause more damage, why the wound is getting worse. What if we've been taught and we believe that our wounds aren't healing because we're just failing to rub the broken glass and gravel into them vigorously enough? Imagine meeting someone who has raised their whole life to think this way about real wounds. Would they likely believe us if we told them to stop rubbing the glass and gravel into their skin, knees, and elbows? No, they wouldn't. It's very difficult to see outside the metaphorical box in which we have been raised. Even the suggestion that a better reality exists outside that box is extremely uncomfortable for many to consider. Certain foods have healing properties, and consuming these foods has become part of some people's traditions. Let's imagine a people that suffer from stomach issues unique to their group. They believe that the issue is genetic and that the special food they consume helps them heal their illnesses. What if it turns out that the issue was not genetic, but it was actually caused by the poisonous food they were consuming? If you knew this and told them, do you think they'd likely believe you, or would they resist? While physical change can be painful and difficult and painful, changing our thinking can be even more so. How many people do you know who are ready to see imprisonment as kidnapping, or to see unjustified military actions as murder, or to see taxation as theft? Even though these definitions are technically true, don't we have a knee-jerk reaction to reject them as being ludicrous because they conflict with the very fabric of our society, the norms that we've been raised with? Do we instinctively label people who say such things as being crazy or as unsympathetic? How far are we willing to go to protect the societal norms that we are accustomed to, regardless of whether they are harmful or helpful? All over the world, sincere, caring people try to help solve society's various problems by applying solutions that end up making things worse. When we enact laws that reduce freedoms, we inhibit that society's ability to heal. The suggestion that we are legislating successive layers of kidnapping, murder, and theft would likely seem ludicrous to them, but it is precisely what they're doing, and they're causing more harm than good. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience living in East Germany. My father worked for IBM his entire career, and when I was growing up, our family moved around a lot. We would joke that IBM stood for I've Been Moved. Yes, these are all the places that I've lived in during my life so far. As a child in the 1980s and early 1990s, I spent a total of 4.5 years living in West Germany with my family. We took advantage of the situation and spent our vacations exploring Europe. When I was young, we took our family on we took a family trip to East Germany, several years before the Berlin Wall came down. I learned about the Trabant, the tiny people's car manufactured by the East German government. The Trabant had remained largely unchanged since its initial creation in 1957, but had increased in price until it cost as much in East Germany as a Mercedes cost in West Germany. And you had to wait 10 years to receive your order. I wondered why the sides of the buildings that faced West Germany were brightly painted while the other sides weren't. I was told that it was an attempt to hide the abject poverty that existed in East Germany from the West Germans who looked across the border. In fact, the people in East Germany were so poor that even the World War II bullet holes and broken windows in the buildings remained largely unrepaired a generation later. I learned all this by listening to adults' hushed discussions as the East German people were not allowed to openly talk about their situation. They didn't have freedom of speech, and their government had much it was trying to hide. In 1993, at age 19, I volunteered to go on a 2-year proselyting mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was sent to serve the newly liberated people of East Germany. The infamous Berlin Wall had fallen 4 years before, in 1989, and the people of East Germany were still starting on the slow road to recovery. I got to know them better than I had during my visit when I was a child. I was surprised to see the stark differences between the people of East Germany and West Germany, not just in their wealth, but in their cognitive abilities. Here were people who were close relatives to the same Germans I had lived among in West Germany. While the people of East Germany were generally kind and had the same genetic makeup as their West German counterparts, most of them were much more lethargic and socially disconnected than the West German relations. Alcoholism was rampant, and the people were depressed. I remember one woman telling me that she was just waiting to die. I had never studied politics. I had never studied politics or economics, and I had no idea what caused this mysterious condition. What could have happened that created such a difference between the people of West Germany and East Germany? It wasn't until years later that I began to understand what I had witnessed. Before 1945, Germany was one country. It had suffered under Adolf Hitler's oppressive nationalist socialist government since 1933. After losing World War II in 1945, the impoverished Germany was divided up between Britain, USA, and France on the west, this became West Germany, and the Soviet Union, or USSR, on the east, this became East Germany. The Soviet Union under Stalin controlled East Germany. To the people of East Germany, their new communist government was actually very similar to the harsh nationalist socialist government they had experienced previously. And their country's wounds weren't healing. They were actually getting worse. On the other hand, Britain, USA, and France restored freedoms to the West Germans that they had not experienced since before Hitler's rule. This resulted in significant economic recovery for West Germany. Without its own economic recovery, East Germany remained as it was when the war ended. The people were aware of these differences. In fact, until the East-West border was closed in 1961, when the infamous Berlin Wall went up, the people of East Germany continued to flee to the West at a rate of around 3,000 people per day. The biggest difference between the governments of West and East Germany wasn't in their goals for humanity. The leaders of all nations go on at length about their plans for a better future for their citizens. Rather, the difference lay in the amount of force that governments were willing to use to try to achieve their goals. The East German government was more willing to kill, kidnap, and steal to enable their efforts to reach their desired utopia than the West German government was. Behind the Iron Curtain, the East German government ruled the people with an iron fist. If you were rich, you were punished, unless you were in the government. If you were poor, you were taken care of. In the end result was that all people outside of government were equally impoverished. The system had the result of killing the human spirit and destroying individuals' ambitions for self-improvement. After an entire generation was raised under this system, the people's underutilized brains started shutting down. They often had little to live for because there was little chance that anything would change. In West Germany, on the other hand, many freedoms were restored, and the people were allowed to forge their own paths, to learn from their own mistakes, and to reap the rewards of their own honest, peaceful endeavors. 50 years after the split between East and West Germany was created, the differences between the two sides were astonishing. To better understand how humans react once they have acclimated to the lost freedoms, let's consider the following fictional 5 monkeys thought experiment. A bunch of bananas were placed on top of a tall stepladder. Whenever one of the monkeys would try to climb the ladder to get the bananas, a worker with a fire hose would knock them off the ladder with cold water, and all the monkeys would get soaked. After a short while, the monkeys stopped trying. Then the workers put away the fire hose and never used it again during the experiment. The workers then replaced one of the monkeys with a new one who had never witnessed the events involving the fire hose. When that monkey proceeded to climb the ladder to get the bananas, the other 4 monkeys pulled him down and beat him up. This continued until the new monkey gave up. One by one, all of the monkeys were slowly replaced until none of the original monkeys were present, and none of the ones that were there, had experienced the cold water from the fire hose. And yet they continued to stop each other's attempts to reach the bananas until they all gave up. This is similar to humans. Once we've been prevented from doing something long enough, we'll start preventing others from even trying to do the same. Once freedoms are lost and we've acclimated to our new situation, we'll instinctively resist restoration of those freedoms, even when the prize is within the reach, if only tried. So what is freedom? Often when people say the word freedom, they are merely describing a feeling of great happiness or a release from stress, such as the feelings you experience when going on a cruise, graduating from college, finishing finals, removing the mask after leaving a store, getting a job, attending an all-you-can-eat buffet, learning a skill, soaring through the sky, winning the lottery, or having all your needs taken care of. But for the oppressed people behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany, the meaning of freedom, the difference between them and their West German relatives, was more simplistic. East Germans lived in fear of their government kidnapping them, apprehending their property, and even killing them if they didn't fall in line. To help understand what freedom is, let's consider what constitutes a loss of freedom. You are not free if you're dead. You are not free if you're in prison. And, although it's perhaps less apparent, you are not free if everything you've built has been destroyed or stolen. In summary, you are not free as long as you are threatened with murder, kidnapping, or theft. For the purposes of this discussion, we will refer to these threats as the use of force or compulsion. When a political philosophy leans on murder, kidnapping, or theft to exist, the only reality that can exist under that philosophy is slavery. Freedom is the opposite of force or compulsion. It is what you naturally have when you are not having your life, freedom, or property threatened by murderers, kidnappers, or thieves. Since my time in East Germany, I've learned how freedom produces prosperity, or more specifically, how freedom allows people to lift themselves out of poverty. Economic freedom results in economic prosperity, and social freedom results in social prosperity. I have learned that the commonly accepted practice of using force or compulsion to solve life's problems has actually been the cause of the majority of the world's wounds. Yet, from year to year, the people of the world continue to seek to increase the amount of applied force or compulsion with the hope of seeing different results. I have realized that freedom is not a luxury that will happen once, the problems of life have been solved, but instead is the actual healing balm needed to help solve life's problems by removing the metaphorical splinter and allowing us to heal ourselves. People everywhere want to thrive and prosper. As I have studied economics, I have learned that among a free people where murder, kidnapping, and theft were the only things forbidden, the trade of products and services only occurs if both sides believe they will benefit. Otherwise, they would not trade. Likewise, a free people are also likely to learn more and learn faster as they experience the natural consequences of their choices. Freedom helps everyone involved to better achieve their greatest potential. Embracing freedom is an expression of love. It is a commitment to coexist peacefully with those who might behave and act differently than we do. As long as others aren't threatening to murder, kidnap, or steal, then we let them be. We let them retain their freedom. Our interactions with them continue to be voluntary, founded on mutual consent. The East German government's intentions to help the people may have been noble, but its implementation of those intentions was destructive. The ugly truth is that government cannot do anything without threatening life, freedom, or property. Laws are enforced by threatening to by the threat of kidnapping through imprisonment, or theft by fines, or in extreme cases under threat of death. Government and its agencies are funded by theft through taxation, funds taken from the people without their consent. George Washington has been attributed with saying, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquent, it is force. Like a fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action." Knowing that force and compulsion are destructive, how do we decide when they should be used? What action should or should not governments take? Most people believe that self-defense justifies the use of force. When should force be used beyond the defense of one's own life, freedom, and property? What would you feel justified? When would you feel justified threatening to destroy someone else's life, freedom, or property? The East German government's stated intentions were noble, but that didn't stop their actions from causing great harm. This is the premise behind a concept of limited government. Unfortunately, the number of people who actually want this kind of freedom is incredibly low. People get used to their captivity over time until they find themselves hesitating with fear when those prison doors are finally opened again, and they miss the feeling of the chains around their ankles and wrists. In psychiatric terms, this is called Stockholm Syndrome. Freedom increases the spectrum of possible choices. Specific results aren't guaranteed, so people who aren't accustomed to that freedom come to fear total failure. But in reality, this rarely happens. Why? Because people naturally want to thrive and prosper, so they avoid shooting themselves in the foot or burning bridges. Not everyone is ready for this truth. In the movie The Matrix, the character Morpheus wisely said, "You have to understand that most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent upon the system, that they will fight to protect it." So what should those who love freedom do in a world that largely rejects some or most of its principles? In a democracy, the minority never gets the winning vote. And democracy to the minority seems like two wolves and a sheep voting on what to eat for lunch. So what is the Freedom Haven Project, and how does it come to play in all of this? People who seek freedom look for a place to go. While it was an option, the people of East Germany fled to the greater freedoms in West Germany. Today, Hong Kongers oppressed by the CCP seek to flee as well. They, as well as others in the world, would welcome opportunity to experience freedom from government oppression. But in a world of dwindling freedoms, where can such a people flee today? This is the purpose of Freedom Haven, to provide those who seek freedom a place to not only survive, but to thrive. The project of Freedom Haven, established 3 years ago, proposes a peaceful solution We plan to build a new country where we and others can flee to experience freedom from non-essential government. We will create a place where the only laws are those that state that no one may threaten anyone else's life, freedom, or property unless you are using the minimal force necessary to prevent or stop murder, kidnapping, or theft. So basically self-defense. But we live in a world where every bit of land, including all the islands of the sea, are already part of existing countries, with the exception of some inhospitable locations in Antarctica. Where can we go to establish Freedom Haven? It turns out there are there are places available, locations on Earth that have not yet been governed or colonized. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea states that all countries' laws shall apply up to 12 nautical miles out from shore. This is called the territorial waters. Some of the laws will apply up to 24 nautical miles from shore. This is called the contingent zone. And the country will be allowed to own and control all economic resources and regulate all floating structures up to 200 nautical miles from shore, or until the end of the continental shelf, which usually doesn't go farther than 200 nautical miles. This is called the exclusive economic zone. If you are less than 200 nautical miles, which is 230 miles or 370 kilometers from shore, then you are under the reign of that country. If you are more than 200 nautical miles from shore, then you are free from all existing laws and regulations. Other than for those few countries that have signed specific treaties to limit their own actions outside the exclusive economic zone, this leaves the majority of the ocean available for colonization outside the jurisdiction of any existing nation. Freedom Haven's intentions are to build just such a colony, a floating city on the high seas outside the jurisdiction of any existing nations. On this map, the area shown in dark blue is outside the jurisdiction of all existing nations. While recognition as an independent nation is not required for the success of this project, we do plan on qualifying as a state under Article 1 of the Montevideo Convention, which says, the state, as a person of international law, should possess the following qualifications: a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. Freedom Haven will have all of these. Even though people have been living in homes on the water, homesteading on the sea, or seasteading, for thousands of years, the reason why the high seas have not yet been populated is that living there is very expensive. Unless you're a worker on a vessel undertaking a business that warrants the high cost of living on the high seas, like being a deep ocean fisherman, Navy sailor, oil platform worker, cruise ship worker, etc., you probably aren't going to consider it worth the cost. Yes, people have lived less expensive lives in smaller and cheaper ships, but they have frequently had to flee storms and spend substantial time back on the shore. And they live more isolationist lives, slowly burning through their savings. This is surviving, not thriving. While there are plenty of beautiful artistic renderings of futuristic floating cities, only practical designs have been physically created so far. And this is the path that Freedom Haven wishes to follow. Unlike smaller yachts, which have to flee to safe harbors whenever storms pass by, the structure we're designing is intended to itself be a safe harbor for passing ships during storms. Such floating cities aren't really new and have been built for decades. Here are some examples from which we have learned. The USS Gerald R. Ford, on the left, is the world's largest aircraft carrier. Its cost to build was $17.5 billion. Its length is 333 meters with 25 decks and a population of 4,539 people. In the center is the Symphony of the Seas. It's the largest cruise ship. Its cost was $1.3 billion. Its length is 361 meters It has 18 decks, a max population of 8,880 people. To the right is the H.M. Algeciras, and it's the largest container ship in the world as of April 2020. Its cost was between $0.16 and $0.18 billion. Its length is 400 meters. It has 20 decks and a population of 20 to 25 people. The main vessel we're designing for Freedom Haven, the Freedom Haven project, combines the aspect of all of these. We want the cost effectiveness of a mega container ship and some of the aspects of a cruise ship that make day-to-day living possible, all while trying to make Freedom Haven defensible from human threats. Combining these all while trying to build something that has the lowest price possible so that more of the oppressed people of the world can afford to live there is a challenge. While the high cost of living at sea can never compete with the always cheaper land prices, we have been able to theoretically reduce the high costs of living on the sea from something that only millionaires could reach, down to something that the average person living in a big city today could afford. This on the right is a New Liberty vessel design. The USS Gerald R. Ford is included for size comparison. Its estimated cost is $0.2 billion. Its length is 172 meters. It has 17 decks and a population of between 5,000 and 10,000 people. We're selling this space that people can choose how they want to use it. Here is a view inside that vessel. All of the products and services you are accustomed to purchasing today will also be available here, with many products and services actually being available in more selection than we have today. For example, you could choose to buy electricity or water or other services from multiple people, whereas most of us only have one option to choose from wherever we live. There will be no forced monopolies in Freedom Haven. Freedom Haven's goal is to construct a physical location where the free market and the free people can thrive both economically and socially, free from threats on their life, freedom, and property. Using the various oceanic data available, we can consider various factors when choosing the best location. We look at the average wave heights to find the location in calmer waters. We'll avoid the rougher North Seas, where the world record 50-meter wave was recorded, and instead stay in the calmer areas where a wave height of 50 meters has never been recorded. We look at the depth of the seafloor for anchoring options, paying special notice to the seamounts, tall underwater mountains which come close enough to the surface to anchor at. These may also provide opportunities to create artificial islands similar to those China has been building in the South China Sea, except that ours won't be in contested waters. We look at the ocean currents and their speed. We'll stay away from the very fast Agulhas current, which flows from the Mozambique Channel between Africa and Madagascar down to the tip of Africa. The Mozambique current is right here, the fastest ocean current in the world. Instead, if we stay in areas that have almost no current, the white areas on this map, we could maintain our position without an anchor and with minimal engine use. We also look at the average ocean water temperatures to find the waters that are the most pleasant to be in. Also important to consider are the international trade routes. If we park close to major trade routes, that could make it easier and cheaper to ship products to and from Freedom Haven, resulting in both faster and cheaper deliveries of the things you order on Amazon, as well as your groceries and other supplies. I'm not here to tell you which solutions are the best ones to apply but instead endorse the freedom that would allow each of us to venture out to try different solutions, learn from our mistakes, and increase in wisdom and knowledge. No mortal being on this planet is better qualified to dictate which path we should each take for ourselves. No mortal except for ourselves. We may share bits of wisdom we have discovered with each other, but as soon as we seek to force those solutions on others against their will, we are causing more harm than good. Even every tyrant in history has claimed that they seek for the good of the people. Yet what they are remembered for is the destruction they have left in their wake. We cannot heal the world until we are wholly committed to embrace freedom and never initiating force or compulsion beyond the minimal needed for self-defense, and also not to ask others to do that on our behalf. Come find out more about Freedom Haven. Read our Constitution, download, explore, and use our open source designs. Read articles, listen to our podcasts, all at freedomhaven.org. Also join our Facebook group discussion at facebook.com/groups/libertarian seasteading. Thank you for your time.